Hello, and welcome to the BBC News. Good afternoon, I am Lloyd.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Cherime Ramirez, and we are your reporters for your news today.
And we are here to report to you all guys about what is a public debt and what is a public debt management.
Also, we are going to talk about President Marcos public debt management and President Duterte public debt management.
Okay, let's start. So, what is a public debt? What is a public debt management? And also, what are the advantages and disadvantages of having a public debt? So, let me call our intern for today. He graduated from Harvard University. So, he will explain to us and discuss to us about it. So, Mr. Kevin, proceed. Thank you for that, Mr. Lloyd. So, let me start to what is a public debt. So, a public debt, sometimes also referred to as a government debt, represents the total outstanding debt of a country's central government. In simple words, it is how much the country owes to lenders outside of itself. So, we all know what is a public debt. So, let's proceed to the public debt management. So, public debt management, it is the process of establishing and executing a strategy for managing a government debt in order to raise the required amount of fundings, achieve its risk and cost objectives, and to meet any other debt management goals. So, what is the advantage of having a public debt? So, increasing the debt allows government leaders to increase spending without raising taxes. So, there are 4 disadvantages of having a public debt. So, first is it lowers rational savings and income. The second is higher interest payments leading to large tax hikes and spending cuts. The third is decreased ability to respond to a problems. And lastly, greater risk of a fiscal crisis. Okay, then discuss to I why government needed to borrow money domestically and from foreign banks. Essentially, the government borrows so that it can enable higher spending without having to increase in tax. So, we all know that tax is how the government collects the money to the people so that they can fund their projects. Because of borrowing the money, they can fund their projects without increasing taxes. Nice! Very well said, Mr. Kevin. So, let's proceed to the report of Miss Chari.
Now, I am going to tackle or discuss to you how Marcos managed the public debt when he is the president of the Philippines. So it is commonly assumed that the international debt crisis is complex and it should be left to economists to solve. So according to Weldon Bello, during the height of martial law on 1977, he issued Presidential Decree 1177 mandating the automatic appropriation for debt service, thus starting the process that continues this day of prioritizing debt repayments before budget allocations for social and economic service and other government expenditures. So the Philippines is the only country in the world with such an automatic debt appropriation law. So in the 1970s, Marcos took out huge amount of foreign currency loans that by the 1980s, his regime could not repay. He tried to hide the dire financial situation by overstating the figures for foreign services. By then, the economy was in a free fall. So the gross domestic product growth was dropped in 5.3%, prices of primary export commodities fell by 50%. So the worker wages were reduced and unemployment hit 1/4 of the labor force. So the crisis worsened with the assassination of Ninoy Aquino in August 1983. As foreign banks withheld their credit facilities, Marcos declared bankruptcy in October 1983 and sought a 90-day moratorium on principal debt payments. So the World Bank provided bailout loans to avert a default, but with painful conditions like cutting the government budget, peso devaluation, tariff dismantling, and ending subsidies. So Marcos had become the proverbial debt addict wholly dependent on foreign aid. The Ibon Data Bank reported the Philippine debt in 1983 comprised to 91% of GNP and 509% of export earnings. In addition, the loans became costlier as creditors imposed higher and floating interest rates. So when Marcos became president in 1965, the total debt was $600 million by the time he was ousted in 1986. UP also reported that the most of the project during Marcos' time by the foreign loans were unproductive, not well chosen, or were probably chosen precisely to finance capital flight through the overpricing of projects. Furthermore, projects were found to be overpriced, mismanaged, not viable to begin with, or made unviable by changes in exchange rate and the international environment. As a result, the government had to squeeze basic services and maintenance expenditures during investment in infrastructure, incur huge deficit, and raise taxes and user fees to service the debt. So let us now compare the public debt management of Marcos' time and President Duterte time. So as Philippines is facing a major crisis last year 2020 because of the rise of COVID-19, and most of the Filipinos has been affected. So as of July 2020, the Duterte administration prudent fiscal management strategy has positioned the Philippines as among the countries in good shape to meet the changes spawned by the coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19 pandemic and bounce back from this global health crisis. According to the World Bank's newly named director for the country, the Philippines' debt to GDP or gross domestic product ratio before COVID-19 plunged the world into a global economic downturn was at only 39.6% in 2019. So with the Philippines' debt of equivalent to just 40% the size of its economy at the time the coronavirus pandemic struck, its government has enough fiscal space to address the emergency triggered by the COVID-19 global crisis. So Secretary Dominguez assured the World Bank that even amid of pandemic, the Duterte administration is fully committed to carry out its Build Infrastructure program, which was another recommendation of the multilateral institution in sustaining the Philippine Inclusive Growth Strategy. Secretary Dominguez assured that the Philippines will strive to maintain its status as among the top 10 countries in the world in terms of planning and executing the respective infrastructure programs based on the result of the recent independent global survey.